أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Dr. Suzy Ismail and I'm happy to be with you again as we continue our journey through Ramadan resilience. Now in our last episode we talked a little bit about grief. We talked about the stages of grief and the fact that in Western psychology acceptance is the last stage, but from an Islamic perspective we want to begin with acceptance. We want to begin with recognizing and realizing that grief is part of sunnat al-hayat, that we're going to experience loss, we're going to experience grief, but how we respond in that initial moment when the tragedy befalls us can really impact the direction that we move forward in and our healing through that process. Now many times when we experience sadness or sorrow or grief and it's unresolved, it's untreated, we're not able to cope with it, it may make its way into depression. And the topic of depression is a very large one. We could probably have a whole series just on depression. But just to better understand the concept of depression, I want us to kind of dip our toes into that pool of what does it mean to be depressed? Why is it so prevalent? Why are statistics now showing us that almost 50% of adults in the US have reported experiencing depression at some point in their lives? And that doesn't even include the youth, and how many youth are struggling and self-identify as depressed or are clinically diagnosed with depression. So depression can be linked to causation. There could be a cause, something that occurs in life, a tragedy, a traumatic incident that someone struggles to recover from. But depression can also be a very difficult field to dive into or to understand, because sometimes depression is not linked to a specific episode, a situation. It can be something internal that we're struggling with. Now often when we go through that experience of depression, it's an experience where our functionality is affected. And functionality being affected means that we may not be able to get up in the morning. We may not be able to find enjoyment in things that we used to enjoy. We may have no motivation. It may be a struggle just to get up and take a shower. It may be a struggle to eat. It may be a struggle to talk to someone. And it's difficult when somebody does struggle with depression to face others, because so many times people are trying to help and in a very good-natured way may say, hey, why don't you go outside for some fresh air and you'll feel a lot better. But when someone is depressed, that cloak of darkness becomes like a safety blanket. And so hearing, why don't you go outside and get some fresh air, can actually negatively impact the individual, because that may be the furthest thing from their mind. And that cloak of darkness may be something that they're holding onto. So it's important for us to recognize that there is a difference between a depressive episode, situational depression, and chronic and clinical depression. A depressive episode may be a state or a period of time in which we are struggling, but that period of time has a start point and an end point. And it's an experience, again, it could be triggered by an environmental factor, it could be an internal response. We see, for example, hormonally linked depression. So someone who may have PMDD, which is premenstrual depressive disorder, somebody who may have SAD, which is seasonal affective depressive disorder, somebody who may struggle with postpartum depression. These are all very real forms of depression, but they are linked to something that is specifically occurring. Seasonal affective depressive disorder may be linked to environmental factors, changes in the seasons. PMDD, which is premenstrual depressive disorder, can be linked to intense symptoms that are affecting an individual during the premenstrual cycle, either pre or post or during. Postpartum depression is a depression that manifests itself after delivery, after having a child. And they're all specific forms of depression. Now, someone who may have a clinical or chronic depression may be someone who can't link the depression to a specific incident. They haven't given birth to a baby. They are not on in their premenstrual cycle. There is no seasonal affective disorder that's occurring, right? And yet, they may be feeling that sense of depression. And it's important, again, not to self-diagnose, but to seek that diagnosis from an expert, from someone who is able to recognize the signs of depression and identify it. Now, as we continue together in seeking a better understanding of depression, In our next episode, we're going to dive into the signs of depression, the responses to depression. What do you do if you feel like you're depressed or if someone you love is showing indications of depression? And also looking to the Quran as guidance in terms of tackling our depression. So I hope to see you in our next episode as we dive into this important topic. Jazakumullahu khair. Assalamu alaikum.